The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma. The medical examiner disagreed, citing the presence of a comminuted skull fracture that indicated more than just simple trauma. This forensic record for this case contains 7 anomalies. Each one is documented here to provide a detailed account of the injuries sustained by the deceased. Upon initial examination, the primary focus was on the extensive cranial damage, which revealed multiple fragments of bone displaced from the cranium. The comminuted skull fracture encompassed both the parietal and occipital regions, with evidence of sharp-edged fractures consistent with a heavy object or weapon. Further analysis uncovered signs of defensive wounds on the arms, suggesting an attempt to shield against the blow that caused the fatal injury. Additionally, microscopic hair and fiber samples were found embedded within the wound margins, indicating potential contact between the assailant and victim during the assault. In conclusion, while blunt force trauma was initially noted as the cause of death, the detailed forensic analysis reveals a more complex scenario involving a targeted attack resulting in severe cranial damage that ultimately led to the deceased's demise. Additionally, microscopic hair and fiber samples were found embedded within the wound margins, indicating potential contact between the assailant and victim during the assault. Chapter: Case Background. The incident under examination occurred on a Tuesday evening in an upscale residential neighborhood of downtown San Francisco, California. At approximately 9:15 p.m., a passerby reported observing unusual activity at the residence of 42 Elm Street. The caller noted that the front door was slightly ajar and that there appeared to be movement inside. Upon closer inspection, the individual noticed what they believed to be signs of disturbance within the house. Out of concern for potential criminal activity or medical emergency, the observer contacted local law enforcement. Upon arrival at 9:45 p.m., officers found the premises secured but with clear indications of a struggle. The front door was slightly open and there were several broken objects scattered near the entryway. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Furniture overturned, windows shattered, and numerous items displaced from their usual locations. In the living room, law enforcement discovered an unconscious individual, later identified through personal effects as the deceased, who displayed severe trauma to the head. The initial assumption among responding officers was that this appeared to be a case of domestic violence or possible burglary gone awry, given the evidence of forced entry and physical altercation within the home. The scene was secured for further investigation by forensic specialists and medical examiners. Chapter: Initial findings. Upon arrival at the scene, first responders observed a male adult lying supine on a concrete surface within an alleyway. The body was positioned with extended limbs and minimal post-mortem movement evident due to the short duration since death. No signs of prior resuscitation attempts were noted. A comminuted skull fracture was immediately apparent upon visual examination, characterized by multiple fragments displaced from the cranial vault. There were no visible defensive wounds or evidence of a struggle within the immediate vicinity. The initial medical assessment suggested blunt force trauma as the primary mechanism of injury based on the extensive damage to the cranium. Given the severity and nature of the injuries, the manner of death was provisionally classified as homicide pending further forensic investigation. The presence of this significant cranial fracture prompted an immediate referral for a full autopsy to determine the cause and exact circumstances of death. Chapter: Forensic Investigation. At the scene, a comminuted skull fracture characterized by multiple bone fragments was observed on the deceased's occipital region. Forensic technicians meticulously documented the location and extent of the injury with photographs and diagrams. Various small bone shards were collected from around the head area using sterile tweezers and placed into individual evidence bags. Blood spatter patterns consistent with a blunt force impact were noted on adjacent walls and furniture, indicating a close-range assault. A fragmented household object, suspected to be the weapon based on its size and shape matching the injury pattern, was sealed in a plastic bag and labeled for further examination. All collected items were carefully logged into the chain of custody protocol to ensure integrity throughout processing. Computed tomography, CT imaging, revealed multiple comminuted skull fractures consistent with severe blunt force trauma. Microscopic analysis of bone fragments collected from the impact area confirmed extensive fragmentation and displacement indicative of high-velocity impact. Histological examination of tissue samples surrounding the fracture sites demonstrated evidence of acute hemorrhage and inflammatory response, including neutrophil infiltration. Quantitative polymerase chain reaction, qPCR. Assays were performed on DNA extracted from perifracture blood clots to assess for trauma-induced gene expression changes. These tests revealed elevated levels of interleukin-6 IL-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha, confirming the presence of an acute inflammatory response. Radio-pack markers identified in CT images indicated foreign bodies within the fracture sites, likely due to shattered cranial vault fragments or external projectiles. Forensic evidence analysis revealed a series of events leading to the deceased's fatal injury. The presence of multiple impact sites on the cranial vault indicated repeated blows sustained during a brief period before death, consistent with an intense struggle or assault. Radiographic imaging confirmed comminuted fractures characteristic of high-velocity blunt force trauma, suggesting use of a heavy object as the weapon. Analysis of blood spatter patterns and distribution at the scene supported this sequence of events, indicating multiple strikes to the head. Soil samples from beneath the deceased's scalp provided an estimate for the post-mortem interval through soil chemistry analysis, placing time of death within 24 hours prior to discovery. This timeline confirmed a rapid progression from injury to death and contradicted assertions of prolonged survival after initial impact based on absence of environmental contaminants beyond expected levels. The comminuted skull fracture observed during autopsy indicates multiple impacts to the cranium, resulting in fragmented bone pieces embedded within the brain tissue and subcutaneous scalp layers. Radiological imaging confirmed the presence of linear fractures radiating from a central impact site, consistent with blunt force trauma inflicted by an object capable of generating significant kinetic energy transfer. The distribution of these injuries suggests a series of strikes likely executed with intent to cause incapacitation or death. Microscopic analysis revealed hemorrhagic shearing at the fracture lines, corroborating high-velocity impacts. While the specific weapon remains undetermined, the pattern and extent of damage strongly suggest a handheld implement with a broad impact surface. Under oath, I would assert that the injuries are consistent with those inflicted in a violent altercation, providing strong evidence for prosecution in establishing both causation and intent in the case of death by blunt force trauma. Chapter: Resolution. The final determination in this case of blunt force trauma reveals a comminuted skull fracture resulting from a single, high-impact event consistent with being struck by an object of significant mass and velocity. Initial assessment had suggested multiple minor fractures potentially indicative of prolonged assault. However, subsequent examination through CT scans and detailed macroscopic analysis revealed a singular, complex fracture pattern characteristic of a single, forceful blow. Chapter: Resolution. The final determination in this case of blunt force trauma reveals a comminuted skull fracture resulting from a single, high-impact event consistent with being struck by an object of significant mass and velocity. This shift in understanding was precipitated by the discovery of bone fragment displacement, consistent with a single, concentrated point of impact rather than diffuse trauma. Microscopic evaluation confirmed the presence of fresh hemorrhaging around this central area of damage, corroborating the timeline and nature of the injury as acute and singularly inflicted. Therefore, evidence conclusively points to a single, catastrophic blow delivered by an object capable of generating sufficient force to cause comminution within the cranial vault. This finding resolves the discrepancy between initial observations and subsequent forensic analysis, providing clarity on the mechanism of death. Analysis of comminuted skull fractures in cases of blunt force trauma underscores the importance of detailed radiological examination and meticulous documentation of fracture patterns. Such evidence is crucial for reconstructing the sequence and nature of traumatic events, informing both investigative and legal proceedings. The file remains open,